Welcome to the Preciseli Podcast, brought to you by Preciseli, a company at the forefront of genetics and personalized medicine. At Preciseli, we understand that our genes play an important role in determining our susceptibility to different health conditions. So we analyze each person's unique genetic blueprint to inform better health decisions. In this podcast, we will be featuring an amazing lineup of renowned experts from diverse fields of scientific research and healthcare, as well as insightful discussions with our very own co-founders and advisors. We'll explore the latest advancements in genetic research, dive deep into the interplay between genetics and health, and provide our listeners with practical insights to successfully navigate their own genetic background. My name is Nikki Burress. I work at Preciseli, and I work in product growth. I have a background in molecular genetics and a very keen interest in science-backed healthy aging. Our podcast host today is Dr. Ilene Klein, the Chief Population Health Officer at Preciseli, with a very impressive background advising businesses on their health and wellness strategies. She has dedicated her career to improving the lives of working adults, their families, and their communities. So her diverse credentials include a master's degree in music therapy from New York University, a medical degree from Harvard, a residency at Brown, and a recognition as the fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. So we are so pleased to have her leading our discussion today. So welcome to our inaugural podcast episode. In this debut installment, we will dive into the journeys our co-founders embarked on to reach their current positions and their motivations behind the birth of our company. So in our upcoming episode, we will build upon this conversation as we explore the groundbreaking possibilities inherent in utilizing DNA analysis to personalize an individual's genetic risk assessment for complex diseases. So we'll talk about what it means for the fields of precision medicine and preventative healthcare. So without further delay, I am thrilled to hand the microphone over to Ilene. Ilene, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nikki, and a warm welcome to today's listeners and to our guests. So I've been following medical advancements in assessing one's personal risk of cancer and in the early detection of cancer for quite some time, with an eye towards improving cancer outcomes. I'm a physician who's, walked beside people with cancer from giving them a diagnosis to the end of life and everything in between. I'm a daughter with two parents who both had cancer, and I'm a cancer survivor myself. So I was thrilled to have the opportunity to join the Preciseli team. As I told to Ash and Ali when they approached me about this, there are three things that I look for in joining a company, and it's to learn something new, to do something that really matters to me, and to work with people that I really enjoy working with. And they hit the trifecta. So today I'm excited to delve into the world of precision medicine with two exceptional individuals, people that I am so proud to call my colleagues and the brilliant minds behind the company. As Nikki mentioned, today we're going to explore their personal journeys into precision medicine, why they decided to form the company, and the driving forces behind our mission today. So it is my pleasure to spend time with them and to introduce them to you. So I'm going to read this because they have extensive backgrounds, and I'm not even going to cover the half of it, but we'll have more time to hear from them and let them tell a little bit more about their stories. So Dr. Ali Torkamani is Preciseli's co-founder and chief scientific officer. He's a professor at the Scripps Research Institute and the director of Genomics and Genomic Informatics at the Scripps Research Translational Institute here in San Diego. Ali's work is at the cutting-edge intersection of genomics and informatics. He focuses on identifying the genetic causes and underlying mechanisms of diseases that define a person's health risks. Ali is a much sought-after expert, having authored over 100 peer-reviewed articles, in addition to numerous book chapters, and even the popular press has picked up his groundbreaking work. Ash Misra is Preciseli's other co-founder and the company's CEO. His background includes a successful track record as a healthcare entrepreneur. In 2017, he led a successful acquisition by IDX Laboratories of his company VetPath Diagnostics, a company at the intersection of molecular diagnostics, specialty testing, and cancer in the veterinary space. Over the years throughout his career, he's accumulated expertise in biologic therapies and medical devices and is passionate about healthcare, innovative ideas, and harnessing data to change people's lives for the better. Welcome, Ali and Ash. It's great to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, Ali, before we dive into Precisely's mission and the company's focus on changing the way we screen for cancer risk, let's spend a little time talking about you. So, first off, how'd you get into the field of genomics and informatics? What grabbed your interest?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I've been interested in genetics and genomics since as far back as I can remember, really. Well, maybe more genetics as a kid. I didn't really know about genomics back then, but genetics has always been a fascinating topic to me. And that sort of goes back to questions about more existential questions about, how we are, why is it the way that we are? Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we have the health problems or lack thereof that we do? I've always been interested in the question of prediction in general. If we can know sort of a lot about someone or comprehensively characterize them, then we should be able to predict their next action, or what's going to happen to them in the next, let's say, 5 minutes or 1 year, etc. And that basic question sort of drove me towards genetics. I think genetics is a big part of answering that question, and so sort of taking this idea of prediction and making it a little bit more practical, applying to genetics and predictions about health, essentially.
So big questions for a little boy. So how great that's followed you along the way. So tell me, what these days, are you working on that gets you excited to jump out of bed and get to work on these big questions?
We started this pursuit of using polygenic risk or genetic risk estimation to predict risk and to drive people towards preventative behaviors. And so we're doing that at a sort of a simple level, which is sort of the communication of genetic risk information alongside other health information. So that's really interesting. But I think the next step there, or the next wave there, is even more interesting, where we take that information, combine it in machine learning models, do some complex sort of layered predictions where we're predicting sort of intermediate phenotypes for an ultimate outcome that we would be interested in. That, I think, is super exciting. It takes the power of genetic risk estimation to the next level.
So, Ash, I'm going to ask you a similar question in a little bit, and a couple more to understand your journey. But one last question for you, Ali. So, you're a pretty popular guy. You're in high demand. You're wearing 2 hats. You're doing research. You're on boards. What prompted you to devote additional time and energy into forming Precisely?
Yeah, I think it's all about impact, really. I mean, I think early on in my career, I thought I would, be happy kind of doing self-driven sort of research on my own. But, I'm only one person. There's only so much that I can do on my own. And I feel that, I have the knowledge and expertise to do a lot more than the hours that I can sort of put in myself. And I think ultimately, real world impact of research comes through commercialization and sort of realizing that in the real world, and sort of making research practical, essentially. So I really want to see the real world impact of the research that I do. And so I believe that commercialization is one important way of doing that and getting the information used in the real world.
Yeah, well, that's really admirable. And I can identify with that as somebody who's done clinical work and strategy work, and really having the two inform each other and really seeing practical applications of things that are really important to move forward in healthcare is extremely rewarding. So we're fortunate that you decided to devote your time to this. So, Ash, let's turn our attention to you and what inspired your involvement in doing transformative work in healthcare. And as Precisely CEO, what excites you to get up every day and delve into this work?
So first and foremost, Eileen, thanks for coordinating this and being here, and really appreciate you having me over. Um, so I come. So let's start with the origin story, right? I come from a family of doctors. They wanted me to go into the medical profession, and I was the black sheep of the family. And I chose to go in a different line. Decide to do my MBA, get in marketing. Fast forward 15, 20 years, I come to the US and I start my career in healthcare, and I fall in love with the power of healthcare and the ability to really transform people. I went into the pharma industry, and I was working on many therapies which really transform people's lives, especially in autoimmune diseases like Crohn's disease, for example. Uh, However, most of the pharma industry is focused on the treatment side of things. And one question which really gnawed at me was, how do you really take this to the part of prevention? How can you deliver groundbreaking therapies or come up with innovative solutions which really drive the prevention part of it? Right now, I understand in some diseases you can only treat, but in a lot of common diseases like cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic diseases, you really can drive prevention. And that was really the genesis of me starting to think differently. When I decided to leave AbbVie and do my own startup, I got into the space of diagnostics. I ran a company for 8 years. It was on the veterinary side of things, but I saw the power of diagnostics, what diagnostics could do. There's a very common statistic out there which says 90% of all clinical decisions are based on diagnostics. And after we got acquired by IDEX, I wanted to do my next career wanted to be in something where I could combine prevention, be on the cutting edge, really bring out a new innovative solution which could drive that prevention forward. And that's how I came across Ali's work in polygenic risk scoring and genetic modeling, and that inspired me to really get in touch with Ali, really research that field. After my acquisition, I spent about a year and a half, 2 years researching it, and there is a lot of power in early prevention and really personalizing therapies or personalizing solutions to the N of one, which is what really attracts me to Precisely and got me to co-found this company with Ali.
Well, Ash, you've told me your story before about how you got into this, and it's really great to hear it again. And I continue to be moved by it. I think, moving and the field forward, particularly in an area that's really going to change lives, really requires the kind of passion and interest and expertise that you have. So we're lucky to have you as a CEO. So my first question goes to you. Precisely's mission is to democratize access to precision health diagnostics at scale. So let's break this down a little bit for our listeners. Tell us about what are precision health diagnostics, and what does Precisely mean when it says that it's democratizing access?
That's a great question, Eileen. So, to start with, genetics really is the foundational risk which we all have or inherit from the time of birth, right? And historically, we have always treated people based on symptoms. However, as the science has progressed, has precision medicine or genetics has become more prevalent, we now know that we can identify diseases at a very, very, very early stage, right? Much before symptoms come up. And this is especially true if you have symptoms right from birth, and you're now seeing amazing innovations with CRISPR and gene editing, where you can take care of all these really devastating diseases right as people are born. However, for many diseases like cancer are cardiometabolic diseases. You may be born with a certain risk profile, but that risk profile does not emanate or does not manifest itself till much later. However, if you can screen the people very, very early on a population level, what you now can do is identify subpopulations who are at higher risk and really start applying a transformative methods to manage those populations really, really early, whether those methods are lifestyle behaviors, whether those methods are getting them started on prescription medications earlier, but you really, really, really can make that difference earlier. Now, coming to our mission, we are at this very interesting juncture in our history where the cost of genetics is plummeting, right? It is decreasing by the every month, every year, the cost of genetics is plummeting. And hand in hand, we have the emergence of personalized therapies coming in. And what we really want to do is provide this access of the power of low cost genetics and these personalized therapies to as many people as we can. So if you see our mission, which is democratize access, i.e., make it available widely to a whole bunch of people at scale, that means there are no barriers. Anyone can click their smartphone, anyone can come to our website and get this service. And that is really at the root of our mission, is to provide this therapy as broad and as widely as possible at a affordable price point so that everyone can benefit from this from these innovations.
So basically, Ash, what you're saying is that testing somebody's genetic profile has reached a point that's affordable, and that by making it available through multiple methods, something as simple as even through your iPhone, people will have access to their personalized risks in ways they've never had before. And that's pretty exciting. I know that Precisely is using something called polygenic risk scores for this precision medicine approach. So, Ali, can you talk a bit about what polygenic risk scores are and some of the hypotheses that you're pursuing right now that are really informing Precisely strategies?
Sure, I'd love to. So, polygenic risk is a form, a description of, a form of genetic risk. So most of us are probably familiar with monogenic risk, although we probably don't know it by that name. But monogenic risk is the type of thing that you often hear in the news. Researcher X found the gene for disease Y. An example of that is BRCA mutations. Angelina Jolie, for example, famously had a mastectomy due to the fact that she had very high genetic risk for breast cancer, and that was due to BRCA mutation, or monogenic risk being a single gene, a mutation in a single gene driving your risk for disease. So while that's extremely important, it's a sort of a rare form of inherited genetic risk. Most of the genetic risk sort of responsible or underlying common diseases in the population is not really due to monogenic factors. It's due to polygenic factors, which just means many genetic variants contributing to your risk. So on the monogenic side, you'd have these rare one-off events that drive your risk to a very high level. But for most people, it's more of a polygenic spectrum, and it's the sort of the load of these more common genetic variants, each of which contributes a very small amount of risk, but the accumulation of them can be equivalent to monogenic risk. It's that spectrum of polygenic risk, or the many variants that contribute to your overall risk, is what's called polygenic risk.
Great. So, what are some of the insights that you've had in your research that are really informing Precisely's work today? And what are some of the things that you're looking at that you think might be informing its mission in the future?
Yeah, so ultimately, we want to convey comprehensive genetic risk information to individuals early in life so that they can use that information to act on their risk. So some of the research that we're doing is more along the lines of how do people respond to genetic risk information when you communicate genetic risk information to them. How do they respond to that information? Do they understand it? Do they use it appropriately, etc. So we had a study called the MyGeneRank study where we communicated polygenic risk information, in this case coronary artery disease genetic risk information, to individuals, and wanted to see whether or not they would use that information to initiate preventative behaviors. And in fact, we saw that the people that were told that they're at high genetic risk initiated preventative behaviors more often and much earlier. And I think those insights really apply to any common disease, cancer included. Of course, the downstream actions might be different. You might be more about screening than it is about like prophylactic therapy. But ultimately, I think those insights apply, and you just need to understand what the best way is to communicate, specific sorts of genetic risk information. So that's one thing that we're studying and looking at, and the other is how can we use that genetic risk information to improve risk stratification, and that gets to some of the machine learning topics that I mentioned previously, where you can start looking at multiple polygenic risk scores for various conditions, all sort of interrelated and perhaps driving a set of conditions that you might be interested in predicting and preventing. And we're finding that essentially you can use genetic risk information alongside more traditional risk factors to get much better prediction of risk than what is used in sort of the clinic at the moment. And you can use that to stratify the population more accurately and start going away from this concept of using, average population risk to make clinical decisions and make it more personalized using polygenic risk information.
Great. Well, so speaking about accuracy, so where is the field now in terms of accuracy and prediction?
Yeah, so that's a broad question. It really depends on the specific disease area, really. I mean, we certainly haven't discovered all the genetic risk variants for, let's say, cancer or coronary artery disease, and some areas are maybe more well established than others. But we are at the point now that at least for many of the most common heritable conditions, we understand enough of the genetics that we can start using that information to stratify people into higher or lower genetic risk groups. So it's not perfect. And even if it were perfect, genetic risk prediction is still probabilistic. Really, it's not a deterministic sort of situation. If you're at high genetic risk, that doesn't guarantee that you will have disease. If you're at low genetic risk, it doesn't guarantee that you won't have genetic disease. And even if we could describe the genetics completely, it would still be in that probabilistic realm. But anyway, but you can use that information to sort of drive your probability of having disease lower, or focus your efforts on those places where you have elevated risk, and you should probably intervene to do something about it.
Well, thanks for sharing the results of your research, and thanks for doing it. And really, it confirms what I've seen in clinical practice, which is, you can do the typical screenings for people and tell them about their health risk. But once you give them information that's irrefutably about them specifically, there's something about that information that motivates people to take the next step, whether that's a change in habits or whether it's going to get a screening, that I've seen is just highly motivating, and people just seem to be compelled and motivated to take the next step. So we're grateful, Ali, for the research that you're doing. So Ash, turning to you, why Precisely's focus on cancer? Ali kind of alluded to it, but why not, more common conditions like diabetes or hypertension?
That's a great question, Eileen. So I think so. Ali touched upon it very briefly. And the power of genetics is really looking at individuals not through the lens of average risk. So let's take cancer for a second, and then we can delve into why not other conditions. Um, in cancer, if you see today, the guidelines which drive cancer screening and cancer prevention, these were constructed back in the 50s and the 60s when they were trying to get as many people screened at the lowest price possible, right? And the concept of average risk, and the population was also fairly homogeneous back then. The concept of average risk probably worked. Fast forward to today, when you look at the data which has come out, and when you look at our population, which is very, very diverse, and the availability of tools like genetics and other tools, we really should be moving away from this concept of average risk to something called personalized risk. Because let's take me and Ali, for example. We are very, very similar age groups, but there are vast differences in our family history, our ancestry, our lifestyles, or even for that matter, our compliance with traditional screening methods, right? So Ali's risk and my risk are going to be very, very different. So it does not make any sense for me to go and get the same screening protocol as Ali would. The other aspect of it is when you look at average risk today, in the United States, we spend between 40 to 80 billion dollars annually on screening protocols, but only 30% of the cancers can be caught using current screening protocols, which is colonoscopy, mammograms, or other screening protocols. 70% of cancers cannot be screened for. That's point number one. And out of that 30% of cancers, only 14% of cancers are actually detected through screening. So if you look at the risk reward ratio or the efficiency ratio of using the concept of average risk and put it fast forward it and look at the data, we are spending between 30 to 40 to 80 billion dollars catching about 2.8% of the cancers which are there, and we know the linkage between early detection and survival. We really need to move away from average risk to personalized risk and catch cancer as early as possible because it has huge survival benefits. So, when we took a step back and said where we could apply genetics, there were two areas which we focused on. One area which Ali has done a lot of research with MyGeneRank, which is cardiovascular, and the other one was cancer. And we chose to go with cancer because the problem is really more pressing. Not to say that we won't apply this in the future to cardiometabolics, but cancer is where we are starting. We think there's a huge bang for the buck available. And that's where the mission of democratizing access to everyone who wants it really plays into what we are specializing in.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this. And, I'll open the question up to both of you. But what do you see are the driving? I mean, you've touched on some of them, but what are some of the other driving forces that are moving us in this direction to a more personalized approach? And, Ali, through, the work that you're doing, what are some of the next things on the horizon that's really giving you hope, and that you're looking forward to seeing in advancing this field of a more personalized approach to early detection? And are you seeing anything that's showing that by doing that, we'll be improving the health outcomes?
I like to think of the age that we're in now for genetics as sort of the nation scale biobank age. So, even let's say a few years ago, we didn't have anywhere near the degree of genetic data linked to clinical data, EHR data, etc., that we do now. Even let's say 10 years ago, most of the GWAS studies were relatively small, in the tens of thousands of people would be considered a big study.
So, Ali, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. For some of our listeners, what's GWAS?
Yeah, yes, genome-wide association study. It's sort of a very brute force way, I would say, of discovering genetic variants that underlie risk. You comprehensively, or more or less comprehensively, ascertain the genomes or the genetic variants in a large number of people, and you have individuals with and without a disease that you're interested in, and you do sort of a statistical test looking at individual genetic variants and whether or not they're associated with disease. So 10 years ago, that was done in, on the order of tens of thousands of people, low tens of thousands of people. Now, it's not unusual to see a GWAS study in the millions of individuals. And that's really the scale of data. Well, not only millions of individuals, but millions of individuals whose phenotypes are more comprehensively ascertained as well. So that those individuals' genetic data would be linked to their electronic health record data, which gives a relatively comprehensive view of their health. So you have this huge explosion of health data connected to genetic data, and that has really empowered not only the genome-wide association studies that ultimately identify the genetic variants underlying polygenic risk scores, but also allow you to combine multiple polygenic risk scores with a battery of clinical risk information and start making these more complex predictions of risk. So yeah, I think it's really all about the data, and we're seeing a huge explosion of data now that's just really empowering us to make more accurate predictions and tie those predictions to more precise interventions.
Well, you mentioned you're a guy who likes to see clinical applications of the research that you're doing. So I'm wondering if you have an example or two that's out in the field of how this is, how this is being currently used, or, what the movement is, where you think, is right, what's right around the corner that our listeners can be looking forward to.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's really cracked the code for how to deliver genetic risk information in a way that is sustainable in the real world. So in a way that ultimately reduce healthcare costs, essentially. That I don't think has been figured out. So there are, Precisely, I think has figured that out, but out in the field, it's not being done yet. I mean, really, polygenic risk information is not being used anywhere near to the extent that I think it should be used. So you have mostly at this time more academic research studies that are focused on sort of demonstrating the utility of polygenic risk information. And I think that's been done very well in a couple of scenarios, cancer being one and coronary artery disease another. But, the broad adoption of that information in general sort of clinical practice, we're not anywhere near that yet.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. And there's a lot of excitement around the corner. And part of that is right here at Precisely. So, Ash, I'm going to turn to you, and I'm going to ask you to talk about how Precisely is making this data actionable in meaningful ways for people that really want to understand their risk and take action on them.
Absolutely. So, great question. So, let me play a little bit of what Ali said. We are now at this really interesting juncture of a national biobank. And this is an effort which has been many, many, many years in the making. Other countries have done it. Decode Genetics, which I believe is Iceland, right, Ali? Has nearly 30 or actually 50% of their population already sequenced. We are quickly approaching that mark with the U.S. Veterans Program recently had 1 million people join their sequencing project. All of us is another thing. What we are doing at Precisely is the mission of all this data which is being accumulated through variety of different programs, learning from it, and applying it to an N of 1. And what we are doing with cancer specifically is offering a tool where people can get sequenced, not only for their polygenic risk scores, which Ali is famous for and has done a lot of work in, but also for monogenic risk variants combined with understanding the lifestyle and environmental exposure, and really pulling all of it together and giving people an easy to understand, comprehensive way of understanding A, their risk, and B, more importantly, linking them to personalized tools like liquid biopsies and other tools which are available in the market, which allow people to personalize and manage their risk much more effectively. Let me put a data point out there. There is a recent study, and in the show notes, I'll link the study up, which showed that people, those who had a pathogenic variant, uh, 10% of that population had died by the age of 65, versus people who did not have a pathogenic variant related to cancer specifically lived till the age of 73. For the first time, we are now seeing data which directly connects genetic data or genetic variants with longevity or with survival. And that really is our mission, is how do you inform people as early as possible to take action, take control, and really take the necessary steps so they are in the latter cohort and they can take the steps to live a long, happy life. And that's what our mission is, and that's what our product is planning to do.
Excellent. Well, there have been a number of companies that have been out in this field for a while. What makes Precisely different?
What makes Precisely different? I think that there's a few things. One is the focus on the understanding that we have of the field and the sort of rollout of this information in a way to make it both applicable in the real world and sustainable. So I think there are other groups out there doing similar sorts of work, but I don't think that the model in which the information is being rolled out is necessarily one that is going to be sustainable. Essentially, there's sort of these data providers that provide uncontextualized genetic risk information. Some of them provide so many different genetic risk scores, but disconnected from any other personal information from the individual. And while I think having a lot of information is nice, most people need some context to actually interpret that information and use it. So at Precisely, we're taking a really focused approach, one that I think will be applicable in the real world and sustainable. And we have a roadmap essentially to go from more simple uses of that information that integrate well with the current way that sort of medicine is practiced, or risk information is used in medical practice. And then we will sort of layer on complexity over time as the field is educated and starts adopting this information and sort of becomes more receptive to using the information in more complex ways.
So it sounds like you're starting with a solid foundation and inviting people to go on this journey as we learn to have early access to the best information possible about themselves, and really supporting them on their journey. And I can say, as a physician who's, and as a family doc who has ongoing relationships with patients, the idea of really supporting people, it's not a straight line to health. There are ups and downs, and how we can accompany people and give people information that they can then use to determine what they want to do with it, I think is really critical to achieving a healthier life. So Ash, how about you? What do you think is the secret sauce, without giving away trade secrets, but what makes Precisely unique?
I think so. The point which Ali and you touched upon is absolutely right. For us, every time when we look at what we are trying to achieve, it starts with a simple question: how do we activate the member or the customer? We never use the word patient, but they are customers or members to us. And what we mean by activation is, how do we deliver information to them in a seamless way? How do you make the journey so effortless so that the next steps that they need to take to act on the information which we provide is very, very easy? So whether it is our design, whether we look at our pricing, whether we look at the amount of information to provide, how to distill complex information into simple bite-sized pieces, all starts with our member and working backwards saying what is the best way to activate them. So if we tomorrow give a recommendation to a person who comes and says, hey, you have this likely genetic risk and you need to do one, two, three, how do you best deliver that information so that that person can take action on it? So that's point number one. And point number two, Eileen, I think so is the cultural DNA of the company. If you look at our company and everyone who's involved right from day one, it is a team of people, those who have deeply been embedded into healthcare in some manner, shape, or form throughout their entire lives. We do not have anyone who's come from a purely tech field or some other field and said, oh, healthcare is the hottest thing. I want to start working in healthcare. And if it does not work, I'll go and work in crypto next. It is really a group of scientists, entrepreneurs, researchers who are deeply involved in healthcare because it is very gratifying to deliver something valuable to people. And that is really the cultural DNA of the company. We are clear eyed about our mission. We know that healthcare is not a get rich quick scheme, it takes a lot of work. And we are really, really focused on that. So those two aspects really differentiate Precisely from everyone else out there.
Well, I can personally attest to that dedication and the absolute sheer pleasure of working on a mission that really matters to all of us and that we've been steeped in for so long. So I have one last question for both of you. It's typically a question that I used to ask when I was in clinical practice. So I'm going to sort of reframe it for our conversation today. I'd always ask it right before I said goodbye in a clinical visit. So is there anything that we haven't touched upon today that you think is important or interesting for our listeners to hear today?
I think we covered a lot of the main points, but I think I would say that we're at a stage now, and we talked about this a little bit with the biobanks, et cetera. We're really at a tipping point now where genetic risk information is useful, but where sort of the medical community hasn't quite caught up yet. So I think it's going to be an interesting journey. I think getting this information out there, it'll be as much about empowering individuals to take this information, take it to their physicians and sort of encourage them to use that information as well. I really think the change is going to come from the ground up, from people wanting this information and demanding that this information is used in their own medical care or in the sort of maintenance of their health. So don't wait for it to come to you. I think, especially if it's something that's of interest to you, I think it's something that all of us together are going to have to push to make happen.
I think so. We have covered quite a lot of ground. There's nothing new which I can add except, as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. In terms of Precisely, we really are looking for partners. We are looking for partners on the provider side. We are looking for partners on the advocacy side. There are great organizations which do a lot of great advocacy work, all of them focused on either a specific type of cancer or a specific community. And we extend an open invitation to reach out and partner with us because we can do wonderful things. And ultimately, we want to work with people. There are a lot of people who have a lot of anxiety because of family history or someone close to them got affected by cancer. Come onto our website, join the waiting list, or look at our products and start a conversation and learn more. And the whole reason for having this podcast and many other blog articles and everything is really to educate people and empower them.
Well, this has been really a fascinating conversation. And, a couple of highlights that have really stood out to me is that, information about oneself and one's genetic profile is highly motivated, that having one's PRS score is a more precise way for really identifying somebody's true risk for cancer, and that this field really holds the promise of not only early risk assessment, but earlier detection that really holds the promise for improved outcomes in the space, in the cancer space. So I can't think of anything more exciting or rewarding to be working on. I know our listeners have enjoyed listening to you. If they want to follow you, Ali, where can they follow you?
You can find me on Twitter, a Torkamani. Although I don't tweet too much, it's maybe once every couple of months. But I show up on podcasts and this sort of thing as well.
And Ash, how could we follow you, or how can the listeners follow you in Precisely?
Through Precisely on LinkedIn. You can look me up on LinkedIn, Ash Misra, and that's the best way to do it. Or my email, ash@precisely.com.
Great. Well, I know that Nikki will be putting all that information, those links, into the show notes, as was mentioned. I really want to thank Nikki for kicking us off, and certainly for our guests Ali Torkamani and Ash Misra. And to all of our listeners, thank you for spending your day with us. And the Precisely team and I wish you the best of good health.